Very, very important. You know, and every once in a while, all of us who stand up here and yak at you have our own healing issues. About 2 years ago, my dog pulled me over, and I'd never had a back injury or anything. I grew up climbing mountains and skiing my head off and hiking and being healthy. I'm in my 70s now, grateful for health. But all of a sudden, I was cranking around with a lot of pain, So I had to do some of this myself, and part of it was removing the trauma of the shock of being pulled over and falling and then knowing you hurt yourself. Part of it was working with wonderful back doctor at the allopathic medicine clinic. Part of it was working with other healers asking for help. So there's a whole complex of what we can find to help us heal and see each of these parts as our team when we need something to help us. Once the unblocking happens, that's where the cell stuff comes in for me. The deepening part for me is then, what are the cells that are involved? In a back injury, there's stenosis, so we need to clean up the stuff that's blocking. There's pinched nerves, we need to clear the inflammation around the nerves. For the young man who had the bone spurs, what's the cell level? Cell level is, there are bone cells called osteoclasts that can go absolutely, completely clean up the bone spur. And there are osteoblasts, another population of cell that can smooth out where those spurs were. And those are the population of cells that were acting in his leg to heal it. That deepening part doesn't need to be a cell biologist, but whatever you know about the cells really helps. And there's 2 books back there that'll help you. How's that for a plug? Then there is an aspect of the emotion with it. Loving your body, appreciating your body, being aware of it, and bringing that sense of both compassion and awesomeness to who you are in all your 100 trillion cells is very important. So here's a case history. And I called this man yesterday to get his permission because this just came through 2 days ago. He lives in the Midwest. I have never met him in person. I do telephone sessions with him. I'm going to show you from some recent brainwave testing I've done that distance is not a problem with healing. You don't have to be there in person. Probably 2/3 of my clients now are all over the world. Australia, New Zealand, Poland, England, across Canada, across the United States. So this gentleman called me about a year ago because he had multiple myeloma, a very serious disease. He had 5 fractures in his spine. He was in tremendous pain. He could not walk. He was doing everything he could with his allopathic physician. So we did unblocking, moving energy for him, which he could feel. And then the deepening part was looking down at where the bone is formed. Bone in you and in him is a matrix of collagen. And on top of that matrix is deposited chunks of calcium phosphate, which as we stand and walk around and move, responds to the flow of electrons from gravity and from the compression of the particular kind of crystal that's in bone. So the deepening part was bringing bone cells to rebuild his spine. And here's part of the structure way deep inside the cell. Here's the edge of the nucleus. Here's the power pack, the mitochondria. Here's layers and layers of membranes that allow collagen to be formed so you could get a new matrix under which bone could form. So this is what happened to him. It is an M spike, which is a measure of the severity of his multiple myeloma. Multiple myeloma is a plasma cell cancer that's in the bone. Before we started working, his M spike was at 6, which is incredibly high. Now it's down to 0.2. And his doctor, his physician, is astonished. They didn't expect it to get this low or for him to be this well. His hematocrit was very low. His red blood cells were being chewed up by this disease. And now, for at least 6 months, they're in the high normal range. His red blood cell count was also extremely low. It's now in high normal range. His doctor's ecstatic. One of the markers of myeloma is how much thymoglobulin there is. It's very abnormal, highly abnormal, at a count of 7,000. It's now down to 950, which is the normal range. And once again, his doctors are astonished, and he's doing really well. This is what he wrote after the last session. I'm going to let you read it. I'm not going to read it back to you. He often feels very weak after a session. Not so much sadness, I think, as that sense of awe. The crying was clear. He perceived the need to sleep and slept deeply. The body does its best healing work when we're asleep. That's where its resources go to renewal and to healing. So what's the perspective here? How broad is our perspective? For him, he started to be able to walk outside and back in his house. Then he was able to walk a block. And now every day he gets a mile at least in. He's got a little pain in his sacrum that we continue to work on, but he's doing incredibly well. So let's look at perspective and dimensions. Here's what a single neuron in your brain looks like. And you've got 100 billion of them. 100 billion neurons sitting there going click, click, click. So we got all excited about seeing if we could show changes at a distance in some cell population that's easy to measure. If you put a little cap on and some electrodes and connect them through an EEG, electroencephalogram machine, you can record what's going on in the brain cells. So I have a buddy who was at the University of Washington. I'd done some brain testing with. He moved to Santa Cruz, California. So here I am in Seattle. Here he is in Santa Cruz, 870 miles away. So we put together a little research project where he found someone, hooked this woman up, was recording her doing a long baseline, and then called me up and said, "Go for it, Joyce." So I started sending healing. Within less than a minute, her brainwave pattern changed dramatically. Her issue was she'd been through a very severe divorce. She was incredibly stressed and very unhappy. So her brain was showing all beta waves. I'll talk about the different waves and the beta in just a second. And as we started working, her alpha waves, which is that sense of relaxation and peace and well-being, went from 41 microvolts squared to 110, more than double. And her subjective experience was, oh, I haven't felt this good, this much well-being or relaxed in over a year. Now I have a theory, and this kind of blew my theory all to pieces, so I'll tell you about the theory in a minute. So here's the different brain waves. Beta is the brain wave that you're doing right now. It's your thinking mind. And all the beta means is there's a certain speed at which the brain cells are working.